So welcome back. We're looking forward, B'ezras Hashem, to continue in Igeres HaKodesh Chaf. We're only on page Kuf Lamed. The corresponding page would be 258. It's on the bottom, 3 lines to the forward before the end. Literally translated, it's not Ilkus Mamash to create Yesh Mi'ayin. Of course, we'll explain in a moment. But we have to give this, again, introduction. If you're following the previous classes, we couldn't have underscored it more, but we are going to say this is immediate, or introduction immediate, in the beginning of the class, immediately in the beginning of the class, regarding Chaf, and we're going to B'ezras Hashem do so till the very end of this segment, and saying that Chaf is a distinct chapter, it's a distinct epistle of this segment to get us HaKodesh, and for that matter, distinct in comparison to the entire Sefer Tanya. It is a complex, it's a difficult chapter, it's complex, it's deep, it's Kabbalistic, it's not regular. And when we know it, like if you're coming in as, whoa, that's Sefer Tanya, how am I ever going to adapt the Sefer Tanya and its message and to glean the information and all that energy which I'm supposed to identify, adapt to, and live with in my service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is the idea of Tanya. We call it many times the best manual, most perfect manual to our Avodas Hashem, to our service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So where do we see it in these chapters? So the truth of the matter is, we try to explain, and every word of Tanya, in the end of the day, will contribute to one's service to his or her creator, no doubt about it. Even we learn these ideas, which are lofty and complex and deep and nuanced, everything contributes to our Avodas Hashem, because when we learn about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, on high, matters of on high, so we identify with the Elokus, with a godly reality, and when a Yid or any created being identifies with a godly reality, so that is, on the overall, a game changer, because usually we identify ourselves. God can be a concept, but which is not regular independently, because one understands, if they have a healthy mind on their shoulder, they understand in the end of the day, Baruch Hu is the source of our life and our vitality and the length of our days, and there's nothing else other than Kodesh Baruch Hu. But in the overall, that's the way the human condition could establish itself. It always sees self over the source of that very self. But and therefore, the focus and the drives is to contribute to oneself, because that becomes the center of everything, as opposed to the way it is be'emes, that the truth is the emes Hashem la'elam, which is the truth of the matter, Zained Mulvade, Hashem Elikim, and that changes the whole dynamic of a person's approach to even oneself, because at the end of the day, they're part of a grander, they're part of a grander image, but namely, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is really here. I'm not, and if I am, it's because I have a mandate to fulfill, and therefore I constantly align myself with that mandate. So when we learn about these lofty concepts, of course it ultimately makes a difference in the way we act and the way we think and the way we talk, because we're in tune to the godly reality. But on the overall, when you learn Likutei Amorim, you see directly it's being that manual, as we call it, the perfect manual to my day-to-day Avodas Hashem, my service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And even every one of these Igeres HaKodesh, I'll addressing certain ideas associated with Avodas Hashem, service to one's creator. This Chaf is also, in the end of the day, the Alter is going to give the whole message over here of this Chaf, of the virtue and value of mitzvahs ma'asis, actual mitzvahs, doing it physically in this physical world. But the whole lineup and the whole lead up to that ultimate punchline, it is going back and forth in different ideas about the Anhai and explanations of the phenomena of Yesh Mi'ayin, Ex Nihilo, and Nihilo V'Olu, cause and effect. this takes you to a different world, but namely, it's not flowing. It doesn't have that flow of every single chapter, to the exclusion of what we mentioned, I believe, last week or 2 weeks ago. In the 5th segment of Tanya, which is Kuntres Achrin, there's also one similar chapter to that. But as Hashem, we'll get there, we'll note and point out because it's important to know. It is a similar, but between the entire Sefer, again, we have 5 segments in Tanya, we mentioned this, and we do repeat it from time to time, that Tzemach Tzedek mentioned the precision of the 5 segments in Tanya, because this is the Torah Shabiksav, the written Torah of Torah Chassidus, thus the 5 segments, but these 2 chapters is the 2 which are so distinct from the entire Sefer Tanya, from all the 5 segments. So we learn Sefer Tanya, and let's say the first time you're coming on, and whoa, seems like Kabbalistic stuff, and where is the Tanya that everybody talks about? So first of all, this is also part of the Tanya that everybody talks about. If you learn it, and if you understand it, it's an eye-opener, independently an eye-opener. It allows you to understand so much of the Anhai, which is rich, and of course it makes an important impact and effect how we live our lives. But it's not direct, as what I'm trying to bring out over here, in comparison at least, to the entire Sefer Tanya, to the exclusion of these 2 chapters. So it's 2 out of the entire Sefer Tanya which has this style, let's put it this way. And it's important to note, and we're going to mention it as Hashem had before every class, it's going to be a long ride, because Chaf is a long Igeres, it's a long epistle. It's very detailed and nuanced, and it's complex. It's a bit difficult. We try our best, with Eibishter's help, and Chanino, to be able to explain as much as we can, to appreciate it. In the end of the day, we're learning it, to appreciate it, to focus on it on its own, to appreciate, to move on, and to understand these concepts, because if we do understand it, it's definitely rich in content and rich in its message, but it's not the generic Tanya, the way we know it, to all the other chapters, again, to the exclusion of these 2. So, having said that, we're going to go on. To understand everything up till here, you have to see the previous classes. Not fair, we mention this all the time, that we have this amount of time invested in the present class. Not fair that we should take the present time and or too much of it and repeat what we learned in the previous classes, because it's really a click away. A click away. It's, you get us wherever you're watching it, but namely the easier access to all the previous classes. As an example, you get us HaKadosh, I believe this is the 5th or 6th class, and you get us this epistle is on the original website, which is Tanya Online, one word, tanyaonline.com. As all the previous classes lined up, actually from top to bottom, easy access to all the previous classes. The way it's established, also the text in a separate scroll bar, as we constantly mention. Wherever you're learning Tanya, and you familiarize yourself with this Perek Chaf. It's good to and you want to know the message up till this where we're holding. It's all there. But again, in this class, the original website is the easiest way to access all the previous classes. The overall, we do mention Igeres HaKodesh, again, is the 4th segment of Sefer Tanya. Of the 5, it has its own backdrop. We had an extensive presentation at the beginning of 10, which is 10 back of Igeres HaKodesh, to see a little bit more of the backdrop of Igeres HaKodesh itself, this 4th segment, worth to look there. But to understand this chapter again, in the framework of this class, it's tanyaonline.com. And it's truly a click away. So, for example, whatever we did last week and the week before, it's all there. So we should really go straight into it. But we always just a little bit of a recap, a short recap. And we try to make it shorter and shorter every single time, because really, it's really a quick click away. It's just 1, 2, 3, and you're there in the previous class. So why take the time? But if you remember the previous classes, he spoke about it, namely where we actually came from. The Alter Rebbe explains the idea, the phenomena Bria Yesh Mi'ayin. So the classes even before that, the difference of Bria Yesh Mi'ayin, the ex nihilo phenomenon, and then the Ilah Va'ol, cause and effect, which the Ilah, the effect, is very close to its ilo. It appreciates it, understands it, and therefore there's no real dissonance between the ilo. This is higher. This is the cause to that effect. I mean, seichel and midas, which is one of the classic examples given. Of course, seichel is the dominator, developed this idea which established that sentiment, that drive to this which the intellect appreciated, that this is a good thing, as an example, the different examples we gave when we spoke about this. So, of course, the what stands on high is the seichel, the ilo. The olul is a result, is a consequence. It's a derivative or this which comes and established from the ilo. But they're very close. It appreciates that seichel, and for that matter, the moment the person starts less appreciating intellectually, that has an immediate effect on the sentiment, on the attribute, on this drive to it. It starts diminishing. So they're very close, and they identify with each other, and therefore you're talking about the evolution of the high to below. So of course the ilo stands on high, but and then the olul is this the consequence of this which comes about because of the ilo, but they're very close to each other. So distinct in Bria Yesh Mi'ayin, when the Yesh is so distant, not in reality. Alter Rebbe makes it clear time and again. Of course, there's nothing other than the Ayin, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's nothing other than the presence of Hashem, even when you see the Yesh so separated, if you will, in a way that you look at that created being, you don't see its connection to its source, its creating force and energy, which is the sole reason why it exists, not like a battery to a device, because the device is a separate entity, the battery makes it work. No, the entire energy, we gave the example, you see that stone on the top of the mountain, you think, oh, this is created in 6 days of creation, and that's where it is, and that's where it's going to stay. No, every tiny particle of that stone is right now, not then, but right now, which is every second, as the Rebbe points out, but it's every moment. There's a flow of energy from that eye to create that stone, and the energy would pull back, the stone would literally disappear, become nothing as no thing at all, completely disappear as a non-existent entity. So the whole entity of the stone is the Dvar Hashem, which is the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is vitalizing it and giving its vitality, bringing it into existence now. Yet, conversely, look at the stone. Is the stone protesting? Is the stone demonstrating that that energy which it's presently receiving in order to make it exist? Absolutely not. The stone, the image of the stone. Here I am, creator, energy. Like, what are you talking about? Is the message the stone or any created being? Most of our creation has that attitude, if you will. Why so? How could it be? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the only energy. The answer is that's the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, with a program, if you will, of yesh me'ayin, ex nihilo, that the yesh seems, it appears to be separate from it. It's as opposed to ilo v'olo, they're so close, it feels the ilo. And this olul would in turn become an ilo, a cause for a lower level. Something would develop from it, but again, that closeness which exists. So, in the previous class, Alter Rebbe points out something in between. On the one hand, it's a created being. On the other hand, the way they created, they became an entity, came from a certain closeness, a certain union, of an intimate union from the energies on high, which created these nivroim, these beings, but they're so close to their source. On one hand, it's not ilo v'olul. They become somewhat a mitzvah. The Alter Rebbe speaks about neshamas, souls, angels, as an example. He says even he says over here, even worlds which are created, but they're so close to their source that they constantly feel their source, and they constantly identify with their source. He brings a certain, you see last week, even tzaddikim, which were born into this world, but they come, and their connection to the Unhigh is in this type of connection, therefore it reflected in their lifestyle, in their constant identification with the Unhigh, with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with their source. So this is, again, not to repeat, because we elaborated quite extensively in the previous class, that there's something in between. the Bria Yesh Mi'ayin, where the Yesh stands completely separate from the Ayin. And then the Ilah V'Olah, which the Olah stands so close to the Ilah and identifies the Ilah, is really one with the Ilah. It's just this is an Ilah, this is an Olah. And here's something in between. And when and here is what Al Tareb was holding Ach Einan Elokus. They're so close to the on high, but they're not the godly the reality. They're not part of the creating reality, but they're part of the creation, which is so close to Creator, if you will. They're so close, but they're still a created being, not part of the creating force. Now you have to say that because they're so close to everything about them, these malachim, these souls, and these nishamas, even these worlds, they're so close. Everything about them reflects and expresses the godly reality and the passionate godly reality. You would say that they're really part of that koach, that godly force, which ultimately could and would create the yesh, the nivra, the total created being, this which we're talking about, the yesh mi'ayin, this which is identified as a created being from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So maybe they have that force as well because they're so close to the creating force, right? Not the creation. Maybe they have the power to be part of creation because they're so close to the creating force. Says Al Rebbe, no, it's something in between. And therefore, Ein and Elokus Mamash, Libra, as we continue, they don't have yet the koach to create something from nothing, means say being part of this ex nihilo, meaning to say the part of the creating energy, to create yesh mi'ayin, something from nothing, because they are because they are ready, ultimately, they already separated themselves from the kelim of the 10 spheres of Atzilus. And we spoke about it last week. These are the containers of the Eires of Atzilus. And again, no point of repeating it just to take the time. It's not fair. But we spoke about this, click away, and we spoke about this throughout the entire time, the very beginning of Tanya for that matter. Lukuti Amorim even. There's the 10 spheres of Atzilus, there's the Eires and the Kelim, which contain this energy. And it says there in the Kelim and the Eires and Kelim, even Kelim, that in Atzilus, Hashem and his Eires and his light is one, and so too, the Kelim are one. For that matter, can't compare the ones of the Eires to the ones of the Kelim. That's why it says it with precision in two separate clauses, two separate phrases. Hashem and his Eires are one, and then in Hashem and his Kelim are one. It doesn't say and that's with precision because you can't compare the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the Eires, the light of Atzilus, to the Kelim of Atzilus. Nonetheless, it's still part of the phenomenon of Atzilus. The Kelim of Atzilus is part of the phenomenon of Atzilus, and therefore they have the Koyach of Atzilus, and they have the Koyach to create as such. But these Neshamas, all this which we said before, Neshamas Malachim, which we spoke about in the previous class, despite them being so close to their created force and energy, they still don't have the power, the ability to be part of the creating energy. They're because they were separate. They're still a creation, so close to Creator. They're not part of the Creator, creating force. That's what he says, because they separate themselves from the Kelim of Yutzviris, of Atzilus, which also have that one, not as much as the Eires Atzilus, but nonetheless, the Kelim Atzilus are part of the phenomenon of Atzilus, part of the creating force. They were separated already, so they're very close, but they were separated. So if you're separated, you cannot be part of the creating team, if you will, or not team. It's Hashem Echad. The Miyuchad is the creator, but the tool, so to say, which Hashem creates, which would be the Kelim of Atzilus, but you separated yourself from it already. In other words, they're a separate entity, very close to it, as we explained last week's class. But because Nifir the Mekim Mitzvahs, they're not Elokus, to be part of the Bria, to be part of the Ayin, which creates the Yesh. Because Dafka, once you separate yourself, once they're separate from Kelim Atzilus, they don't have that power. Because the Kelim Atzilus, that's where the energy of creation is. Because Shebahen, in the Kelim of Yitzhak Atzilus, you have the Kav, that stream of light coming from the Ein Sof, from the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The light is similar to the illuminator. So when we talk about the Kav, I don't know if I believe in the past we mentioned this phenomenon of Kav and its Tzimtzum and so on, based on the famous Eitzes Chaim, the famous Arizal, which was given over through Chaim Vital, his important student, and explained this whole idea of the Tzimtzum Rishon and the Kav. I believe we did mention in the past, not frequently like other subjects, which came up a little more frequent. Is it important to note this over here? Maybe, perhaps. Let's try to repeat it at least, albeit briefly. When we talk about the Kav, what trickle of light are we talking about? Kav and Tzimtzum, then we make a bracha on a coffee. Hashem forgives us for this contrast, but in the end of the day, we draw the connection of the emes Hashem la'olam. But it makes it easier for us to go on and try to explain this matter. It says when a person makes a bracha, of course, when he's all there, really, all there, the Yid has to try to get there, but he's really connecting levels which is even higher than the Kav. It's Atah, it's the Eibishter himself. Becomes Hashem, and Alekeinu becomes Melech HaOlam. But let's see what we're talking about. When we speak of the Kav, what are we talking about? So there's much to it, but we're going to try to stick to this important image. You can't say image when you're talking about Day on High, but just to understand, we speak about the Kav, known to be this trickle of light coming from the Ein Sof of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu had in this plan to establish creation, starting from the emanation, Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiya, the ultimate purpose, like we learned, Koti Amorim, famous chapter, 36, it's a click away, 36 in the first segment, this is the fourth. Describes at the end of the day, the ultimate objective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this very physical world, not the worlds on high. Yizava HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem wanted a dwelling place, a domicile, down here in this very physical world, where there's a Helam Master, where there's a concealment of Creator from creation. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu desired. That's why He created everything. And He allowed the evolution for everything to come down and eventually to this world to be created. This world, which is a world of Helam Master. We don't have to explain this. We all are so aware of it. A world which, despite every second, every millisecond, everything about this world exists only because of the godly energy which gives it life and existence, but nonetheless, on its own, it doesn't identify with that source of life, and to the contrary, it's not about me, it's a strong selfishness and self-centeredness. It's me, it's here I am. Even if you look at something which is not the medaber, we spoke about that stone. You look at the stone is not demonstrating where it comes from or the energy which is vitalizing it every single second, millisecond, and so on. It just, here I am. The I is very evident in this world. And that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the whole purpose of creation, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted. Why did He want it? We're not sure. We're not sure. We actually don't know. But it doesn't take away from the fact that this was, and this is the most deepest desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that this very physical world should be transformed and become an abode for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what He wanted. It's a very deep Ratzon, famous Memorim of the Rebbe Rashab, that it's the most deepest part, and again, very indicative in that very chapter, 36 of Tanya, and onwards for that matter, the subsequent chapter as well. But namely, 36 says the whole idea, Ukuti Amorim, the first segment, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had the most deepest desire, meaning to say that if we understand it, we appreciate it, it's really, really relevant. We know this is what's real. HaKadosh Baruch Hu had a desire to have a dira b'tachteinu, a dwelling place in this very physical world. So there was the evolution from the high to below, one world after the other, and it says there's infinite amount of elam in this world. But again, not to go into it now, but eventually this world to be created, and this world then sends out an neshama to do that mission, to partner with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this master plan, or Hashem sends it, it's personal emissary, ambassador, and say, you are that emissary, I chose you, you're in neshama, to come and to introduce the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu into this very physical world. Emes Hashem, we call it the reverb, these few words, again, it's a pasuk until, the Emes Hashem Leilam, to draw the Emes, the truth. Not that the truth should be camouflaged and constantly eclipsed and even denied. No, to regala the truth, Emes Hashem, the real reality of everything, is Elokus. There's nothing else in the Kodesh. How does he do it? Of course, through learning Torah, doing mitzvahs. We don't choose our own ways. Hashem established the way how a yid reveals the Emes Hashem Leilam, starting from learning Torah and doing mitzvahs and doing them scrupulously and carefully and being assiduous in one's learning Torah and davening and so on. That's the way we take away the layers which with chutzpah cover up over the Emes Hashem, and we introduce the Emes Hashem Leilam. And of course, in the overall, even the times that we don't directly learn Torah davening, but we do everything l'shem shamayim. A person goes to work in order to make a parnasa, to feed his family, to educate his children in the ways of Hashem. To the work itself becomes also part of the Avodas Hashem. This is basically famous Rambam and the Tur, Reish Lamed Aleph, and so on, as we know. And beyond that, there are rules even in the workplace, the workforce, that itself brings the lukus into Fifth Avenue, if you will. That's the point, that every part, there shouldn't be not one nekuda of Elam Hazeh, this world, which should not be introduced to that Emes Hashem. And then the whole entire world is all, like the pasuk says, Malahar is Deus Hashem. That's the Messianic era. The whole entire world we filled with the knowledge of Hashem. Filled. When you have a cup which is full, there's not one nukuda, there's not one dot, there's not one spot which is not filled with that water. Say the water, the cup is filled. It's a Malahar is Deus Hashem, and it says Kamayim. Mayim also, this is precision, like water covers the ocean bed. Water, there's no even smallest void. Especially when you're talking about water, everything is going to be filled with the knowledge of Hashem. How did it happen? It wasn't just, as I say, Jack out of the box. No, it's the toil of Am Yisrael from millennia after millennia, and introducing that Emes Hashem Leilam through their learning Torah and davening and Mesiras Nefesh and so on, and slowly Mashiach, everything, the truth will be revealed. Not only will it be there, but it will be revealed, will be manifest. Mulahor is Deus Hashem. By Hashem Melcha Kol Haaretz, like we say in the Alkin in the Oleinu. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to create. So that's the reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed and established Olam as all these many worlds, and eventually till it comes to, now all these worlds, they have a purpose and they have a function. Yeah, for example, I mean, it's part of the whole plan, but the ultimate plan, the master plan, the ultimate objective of this is this very physical world, that a yid should learn Torah. That's when he connects, as we mentioned so many times. One Mishnah is greater than one word in a Mishnah is greater than the entire Ilam Haba, for example, because this is where you connect with the Creator, not with a high, lofty, spiritual creation, which is Gan Eden as an example. It's also a world created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Here you're connected to Creator. That's why this physical world, this Avodas Hashem, this physical world is greater than Kol Chai Olam Haba, which is in the end of the Mishnah, right? Mikol Chai Olam Haba. How so? Because here you have the entire Eibishter. Because here, this is where the purpose is. Having said that, so just to get a little bit of understanding, so it says that Kodesh Baruch Hu decided to create an Olam, and the question is, how is it possible that you can create an Olam, a world, when everything is full of the infinite energy of Kodesh Baruch Hu? Like we mentioned many times, like nothing finite can exist in the face of the infinite. And if everything is full of the infinite, well, why shouldn't it be? Because Shema Yisrael Hashem didn't go anywhere. Hashem's infinite radiation is everywhere. So how could you create a finite world, if you will, even a spiritual world, in comparison to the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? It's also finite because it's a world, even Olam Atzilus, we said, a world of Atzilus, which houses the Ein Sof. The world is you, like we just mentioned before, you, and the Eidos are one, and the Kalim are one. It's a world which it announces, or a world which identifies the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu like no other. That's why we say Atzilus is not only just one world over Bria as an example. It's a total different phenomenon. It contains and it identifies and houses the Ein Sof. Nonetheless, It's an Olam Atzilus. As the Gemara says in native and Olam Lashon Halavas, it's a world. Hashem is not a world. Hashem is not a world, even a holy world. Hashem is not a world. Hashem is just about the infinity. It's all about the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So even Olam Atzilus, by all definitions, will never be able to exist in the face of the infinite. So how in the world, right? All these worlds come about. Worlds or levels of, in the face of the infinite, nothing finite, even the most subtle type of finitude, spirit, or anything identifying the finite, the finitude of reality cannot stand in the face of the infinite. It's just impossible. And we explain this idea so many times with different examples. We need not to explain. I mean, especially if you're following different examples. So how do the worlds come about? If everything is, there's no place devoid of Hashem, and Hashem is infinite, so how did anything finite ever come about? Even something even minimally finite. Or even, again, as we say, Elam Atzilus would be a classic example. How did Elam Atzilus come about? Even Atzilus is a world which is so Etzlei. Atzilus is called Etzlei. It's close to Hashem. As we explained this many times, and then even in this phrase, Iyu, Hashem, and Mechayei, and his Eidos of Atzilus, are one. Iyu, V'garmai, even the Kalim of Atzilus are one. But nonetheless, it's Kalim, in the face of the infinite. Olam Atzilus in the face of the infinite. How could that be? It can't. Truly can't. So how did all these worlds come about? Good question. Says the holiest Arizal. And says what he explains us, that he explains the idea which is mentioned in the past, but he explains it so with such accuracy. Even the human mind could appreciate it. What Hashem did, it was a tzimtzum, it was called a tzimtzum harishin. It was a tzimtzum, meaning to say a concealment, a contraction of the air, condensement, a contraction of the air, a removal of the air, in order that there should be a mokim, a cholol, a devoid domain to which the olam in this cholol, in the devoid domain, could ultimately come to be. That would be called, it's called tzimtzum harishin. There's other tzimtzumim, the other contractions. Of course, for example, you talk about Atzilus and Bria, as we just mentioned. Of course, there's enormous tzimtzum. And exists between every single element, particularly, for example, between Atzilus and Bria, which Atzilus is a different phenomenon, as we mentioned so many times. Of course, there's a contraction of the air. But nothing is compared to the Tzimtzum Harishin. And somebody spoke about it. We're going to make an effort to keep it succinct over here. So there was, if you will, everything is full of the Ein Sof. HaKadosh Baruch Hu establishes, it's like, it's not maybe fair to give a physical image to it, but maybe that just gives us the ability to understand the matter the way it is. Because Baruch Hu establishes a cholol, a place which is devoid of the Ein Sof. Is it devoid of Hashem? No, it's devoid of the light of Hashem. How can Hashem remove the light from the light? You take, for example, a candle. I want that in the center of the candle should be no fire. No, if it's a candle, if it's burning, and if it's light, so everything about the candle is going to be light in a candle, and if it's heat and warmth and so on, you can't just say inside that candle there shouldn't be a burning fire. Yeah, that's when you talk about a candle. When we talk about Hashem, Hashem could do anything, and what He did was in this cholol, in this circle, if you will. It's not a physical circle, but He established that He's going to remove the light of His infinity, the experience of His infinity. And then in that cholol create world, olam in different levels. Again, we say the four worlds, but there's infinite amount of worlds and infinite amount of levels. And again, this is separately explained. But the different olamis in that cholol, which it could be created now because Hashem removed His great light from within and allowed the world to be created. And eventually the evolution of one olam to the next. And in the very bottom, for that matter, it says in Chassidus, actually, in this very chapter, that in the end, the bottom of Olamas, of this whole evolution, is Olamasi, is our world, which is, at the end of the day, connected to the other side, which is, again, the expression of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, for that matter, there are ideas which we can see precisely in this world, which carry a certain sense of the infinity of Hashem, but we're not going to go into it now. In the end of the day, we're talking about this devoid circle, if you will, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu eventually creates all the elements. So there, all around is the Ein Sof. How much? There's no how much. There's one place which HaKadosh Baruch Hu removed the energy, the light, the radiance of his Ein Sof. Is the Ein Sof there? Is he's there? Of course, nothing is devoid of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Where did Hashem go from that? He didn't go anywhere. He just turned off the lights, if you will, that it shouldn't be evident his great infinite radiance. And in that, it was an Sinus Malcolm, an ability that worlds could be created. And eventually, the rock bottom would be our physical world, and that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu had. His greatest the desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that in this area of Cholol, and within the Cholol itself, not the Eilim Zalienim, not the superior and supreme worlds, would be his domain, but precisely the low Ein Takt and Mate Meno as expression in Tanya, in many places, the lowest of the low, this physical world, should be the place where it becomes Hashem's greatest desire to have an abode and to be able to be shoched, dwell, and connect with, and of course sends the neshama down here to be that special emissary to accomplish emes Hashem le'olam. Now the question is, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu removed all the air, so what is the energy which ultimately creates even this which is in that Malkam HaCholol? If it's completely removed, so even to create, particularly these high lofty levels, even higher than Atzilus, Kesed, and again, we learned Kabbalah a little bit, we know that there's higher, and yet higher, even before Elam Atzilus comes about. But Elam Atzilus, it's so much, it's enormous in energy, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu remove the light. So how do you have Elam Atzilus? How do you have anything to be created and to exist and to identify with the Lakus? At the end of the day, Hashem established this contraction, this devoid completely of himself, or the radiance of himself, the evidential radiance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of his infinity. He kind of removed himself, again, the radiance of himself. You say, turn off the lights. Everything exists. It's just you can't identify it. You come into a room which you got the most expensive furniture and the most beautiful living accommodations. But when the light's off, you can't benefit of nothing of it. So does it mean because the light's off, it's not there? Of course, everything is there. And in one little light, you can see everything. And go back to the previous abbreviation of the great pleasure which one can glean from this beautiful chamber as an example. When the lights are off, it's all there, but you cannot begin to experience it at all, not even a bit, especially when it's pitch dark. So when we say HaKadosh Baruch Hu removed himself from the skull, of course the whole Eibishter Hashem is there, but he just did not allow any light to be, because even the minimal amount of infinite light which would exist, the worlds can never come into existence. Nothing finite, even Atzilus, cannot stand in the face of the infinite. So if HaKadosh Baruch Hu removed everything, okay, there's a place where maybe all this could develop, but where is the energy which would develop it? If it's all removed, if the lights are closed, so they're closed. You can't do anything. So it says that on top of this cholol, Hashem allowed a trickle of light coming from where? Of course, from the Ein Sof, and a very kotzar is Lashon. It's a trickle of light which would come into this cholol, and that would be the source of all the creation, or all emanations, or everything which exists within the cholol, from the highest of levels, until Elam Atzilus comes about. And again, there's myriads of different levels beyond. And Elam Atzilus comes about, all of that energy of that trickle of light. How could one trickle of light create all that? Answer, because that trickle of light is connected to, out of the cholol, what is there? That's right, the entire Ein Sof. So a little bit infinite, there's no such a thing. When you say a fraction of infinite is also infinite, it has infinite koyach. So is it because it's connected to the Ein Sof, so it has infinite energy, so it's able to create the entire order of evolution known as the Seder Ishtalshlus, which is enormous, beyond enormous. The little one knows about Seder Ishtalshlus post the Kav. It's beyond even comprehension. Conversely, it's a trickle of light. Because it would be more than a trickle of light. Again, we go back to square one. Nothing could fit, nothing finite could remain or exist in the face of the infinite. So it's a trickle of light, but yet it carries so much energy because it's coming from the Ein Sof. It's connected to the Ein Sof, and therefore it has the ability to be that creating force which establishes the entire Seder Shtalshlus in this Challah. That would be called the Kav. What Hashem wants in the end of the day, that through the Avodah of Torah Mitzvahs, which Torah Mitzvahs come from an area which is much greater and higher than the Kav, as we know, but Torah Mitzvahs is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's reality. And Hashem wants us to connect the Emes Hashem, the true Emes, even beyond the Tzimtzum, and deeper, where the true infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is existent in Torah and exists in every mitzvah we do, and fuse the two, Emes Hashem Li'olam. And this world should, the godly reality which inherently exists, the lights should turn on, if you will, and Malor is Deus Hashem, everything identifies the Das, the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the question is, again, you're going to say, if we bring the Ein Sof back into Olam, then we go back to square one. How can they both coexist? So there's the famous I can't believe we're going even that in such a detailed manner down that path again. Or in other words, a little too much of elaboration in this idea. But as we're talking about it, just to have a better understanding, there's the famous example, but even that one is a number of examples. But there's one example which really makes it all clear, and that is the famous example which is given of Rav and Talmid. There's this great Rav, knowledgeable, let's say somebody talking about, let's say in the world of Torah knowledge. He knows the entire Torah, a great mind and a great scholar, a prodigy in Torah, as an example. He's given the mandate to take a 7-year-old child and start learning Torah with him, as an example. This is just 7-year-old, say a 5-year-old. He just started knowing how to read, as an example. Knows a little bit of Chayei Sarah and the story of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and he is given the mandate, and he accepts upon himself the mandate with integrity, that he's going to teach this child Torah. How much Torah? A lot of Torah. And he wants one day that the child should become like him, like any master, which really has his greatest desire that his students, his pupils, his disciples, identify his knowledge one day and is able to appreciate his knowledge to the extent that maybe they will override him, but at least the real teacher, a real master, really wants that he should be so successful with his students that his students should obtain everything which he has to offer. So he has this 5-year-old or 6-year-old in front of him, and then what is he going to do? And if he wants to teach him the entire Torah and everything, he wants his child to grow to be this great scholar and even prodigy, so he's going to just open up the faucet and start unleashing everything what he knows to this little child. We all know exactly that first day. There's no phenomenon of teacher-student, master-pupil, nothing. There's not even a starting point. Over here, everything goes straight over the head of the child. On the other hand, he accepted the mandate to be the teacher. So what is he supposed to do? So we know what he's supposed to do, and what he does. And if he's a good teacher, he does it with so much success that eventually, as long as it takes, for that matter, the Gemara says it could take 40 years. And the average, it takes 40 years that one should ultimately reach the level of his master. And again, a true master, a scholar, true scholar, and so on. It could take many years. But with patience and perseverance, he moves on as a teacher, as this which he accepted as his form of mandate, in order to give over to teach this child. And this child should ultimately develop as a scholar one day, and get even a Torah prodigy, and be the teacher to the next generation, to the next student. How does he do it? If he sits down and he starts divulging everything that he knows, there's no starting point. He could sit 40 years, he could sit 400 years. Nothing will enter into this pupil's mind. He won't appreciate anything. What he does is he removes all the knowledge from his mind. In other words, as we gave the example, it's not that he can remove, he becomes this storyteller as an example, or this classic teacher of a 6-year-old, not necessarily somebody who knows that much or needs to know that much. He knows everything. He didn't forget anything at all, for that matter. Right after the class, he goes straight into his room and he starts learning and reviewing everything what he knows. And if this master knows Kol HaTorah, entire Torah, again, we're talking about, as is in the example, we choose to talk about the Torah knowledge. He never lost it, but when he sits in front of the student, he removes it completely, removes the energy of it, and he starts teaspooning the child with a little bit of dosage, the kav, the trickle of light, into the child. Start teaching him a Rashi, and maybe later a Mishnah, and a Gemara, and a Taisus, and slowly but surely, and again, it could take 40 years. But at this point, the child is growing on his own, absorbing every piece of knowledge, and eventually he could reach, the Gemara says that he could reach the same level, and sometimes they could even override their master, but at least reach the level of the master. How did that happen? If 40 years before, when he wanted to, he would rather unleash all his knowledge to make it quick, nothing would happen. Again, not 40 years, not 400 years. How is it later that the child reached the level of the master? Answer, because there was the tzimtzum. The master decided to establish, so to say, a void. His whole mind is going to clear everything he knows, and he's going to establish a certain kav kotzer, a small a light, which he's going to share with the Talmud. If it's a Rashi, a Taisvis, a Mishnah, a Halacha, and so on. And every day add more and more and more. And eventually, this, which he could not do in the beginning of his tenure, ultimately comes to fruition. And someone's going to say, well, that was impossible, that the child should be able to comprehend everything. How did he do it after 40 years? The answer is because you gave it a chance. You started with a trickle of light, and eventually started feeding him. And eventually there could be the student, which could not pick up anything, at this point knows everything. So of course, in the very beginning, HaKadosh Baruch Hu could not create. There could not be you could not be a creator, or you could not create anything which is finite, because finite can never stand in the face of the infinite, ever. Even a world of Atzilus, even higher than Atzilus, impossible. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu has the total void. Nothing exists. But again, it exists. It's not, the radiance of it doesn't exist. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows there should be a trickle of light connected to all the Ein Sof, and therefore it has the enormous power to ultimately create, just like this teacher, because he's still the master and he has all that knowledge. That trickle of light is a beginning of an important development, a development that after 40 years this student is going to be identical to his master. But he started with a trickle of light, with a little Rashi, Nataisis, and everything. But no, that trickle of light is coming from a master which knows everything. He knows the entire Torah. He's a prodigy in the entire Torah. So whatever he's going to teach is ultimately going to carry somewhat of a message of that great prodigy. And therefore, after 40 years, this student could identify and could be, it would become similar to that very master. And so too, of course, in the very beginning, because Baruch Hu's Ein Sof would be there would be a possibility of any Olam at all. Like, try that student to hear anything deeper than this which the student could comprehend for that master. Nothing would enter, not even a bit. Nothing could nothing could withstand the infinite energy if HaKadosh Baruch Hu would not remove it, even the greatest and the highest and loftiest and holiest and godly, most divine world. Because it's still a world, it's impossible. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu removes, there's the famous Chalol, remove the Tzimtzum Arishin, the devoid of the infinite light of the Baruch, and allows the trickle of light, which is connected to the Ein Sof, the entire Ein Sof, and that becomes the creating force. And slowly but surely, more and more Lukus through the Avodah of the Yid. And they're introducing the Emes Hashem Le'elam. How? Through the Torah. Torah is part of Creator. Torah is part of that Ein Sof. That's what Torah is. So they fuse the Emes Hashem with all the elements, ultimately this world. And then, when Mashiach comes, there's the coexistence of the Ein Sof and Olam, similar to the child after 40 years, becoming part and establishing himself very similar. And sometimes they even override their master. It's not the point of the it's the idea that they become identical to their master. Even it takes 40 years. So after millennia after millennia of Yidden doing Torah mitzvahs, connecting the Ein Sof, this is the Torah. Torah is part of the Ein Sof, not part of the Seder Ishtalshalos, the order of evolution, and they put more and more and more energy into try to fuse the two together. Eventually, they can coexist. This very Oretz, the full Das is Hashem. That Oretz which could have been created, not only our Oretz, even Atzilus could not have been created if there was the Ein Sof before. The greatest student and the most intellectual student could not withstand, could not comprehend if he would unleash all his knowledge. This master will unleash all his knowledge, the level of his perception and appreciation of the knowledge. The most brightest student could not comprehend it. The highest elements could not exist in the face of the infinite. So they had to be the complete void, then the trickle of light, and eventually more and more of Emes Hashem Leilam, and eventually they can both coexist. This is the idea of it known to be the Arizal's presentation regarding the Tzimtzum Harishon. And we say this. Why do we take so much time to say this? Because the Alter Rebbe mentions the Kav. And we said, where does the Kav have all that power to create, to be the source of creation, to be the source of Atzilus? And the Kelim Atzilus, which is really part of that Kav, to be a creating force, is because the Kav is connected to the Ein Sof. Like we say, even a fraction of infinite has infinite energy. So it's connected. Hashem, actually it says, Hashem didn't do the tzimtzum, allowing in the very beginning there should be the Kav. He made sure that it's a complete chol, a complete void, and then he introduced the Kav, which he speaks about in Kabbalah and Chassidus. He could have left it in the very beginning, even that trickle of light. No, but even the trickle of light without that formal establishment, like the master, he has to completely sit down. I'm erasing everything, with a decision, everything. I'm not allowing anything to exist. Right now, how are you? How are you, Talmud? How was your day? How was your morning? He's not talking about anything about who he is and what he represents. Because then maybe itself he wouldn't have that good connection with the Talmud. It'd be nothing. I'm your teacher. How are you? How was your day? How was your bus ride to school? Bus ride to school, what's the connection to him being a teacher, a master, which is supposed to teach him Torah? But he needs to connect with him in a way that there's nothing exists, even his knowledge is not, because he's going to start even teaspooning his knowledge, not necessarily the kid. He's just thinking about his bus ride to school as an example, and you're already teaching him stuff, and maybe it's not going to work. A little bit's going to work, but it's not going to be seamless. So there has to be the complete devoid. How was your bus ride? How was your sleep? And then we go into the Rashi as an example. Then we open up that light. So it says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would allow the trickle of light in the beginning, which again, we're just saying this quickly, that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed, then also maybe it wouldn't work. It had to be a complete devoid, and then Hashem introduces the light into the cholol, into this devoid area. But because the Kav is connected to the Ein Sof, it's a fraction of infinite, but every fraction of it has infinite kayach. Therefore, it can create the entire Seder Ishtalshalos, which has to be, it has to have enormous force. Creating Ak and Tik, Atik and Kes and Arich, in other words, which would be Kesed and Elam Atzil. This is enormous force and energy. The Kav, that trickle of light, can create that? Answer is yes, because the Kav is connected to the Ein Sof, beyond the Cholol. And that's why the Kav has so much energy. And what level of connection or identification exists with the Kav in the entire Seder Ishtalshus? It's the Kelim of Atzilus. Because, as we mentioned many times, the transition from creator to creation is the transition from Atzilus to Bria. Bria, right? Bria is creation. So the Kav really, and again, till Atzilus is also a long way. But in the end of the day, Atzilus, because it's a world which is Etzli v'samach, it's so close to Hashem, and it's Iyu v'chayoyichad, Iyu v'garmayichad, Atzilus and Hashem, and the light of Atzilus is one with Hashem. And in this case, it would be with a Kav. Even the Kelim are one with Hashem, which is the Kav. And therefore, because the Kav is the creating force and energy, so the Kelim eventually is that force which ultimately creates, has that creating force and energy, which creates Olam Abriya, Yitzira, Asiya, which is of course enormous different dimensions within these creations. It's enormous. In other words, it's not just a little creation, a little tiny world. No. Briya Bria, for example, is the entire Gan Eden, and then Yitzir is Gan Eden Tachton. And in this world, just even look at the billions and billions, billions and trillions, quintillions, different types of and created beings which we don't even know. Each species, we don't even know even till today how many they are, and the complexity of creation and so on. Even this very physical world, so the koyach to create is enormous. But that's what the koyach of Kelim Datzilus are, because they're connected to the Oyer, to the Kav rather. They represent, they're the satellite, if you will. Base, satellite base of the Kav, to which the transition of creator to creation, in other words, it has the koyach to create Bria Yitzir Asiyah. So as he begins over here, anything removed, I don't know how much we're going to cover text today, which I have such a desire to move on and move on and move on, because we're going to have to get to the end of Chaf. But I guess we're going to try to appreciate as much as we can. So this, which is already nifrad, as he said, this, which he spoke about in the previous weeks, the neshamas and malachim, they're so close to Hashem. But they're nifrad from the kelim, separate from the kelim, so they're not part of the creator force. They're still creation, which is so close to a creator, because they were nifrad kelim. Because the kelim of Yitzridus, that have the koyach to create. Because Maluba, Shakav, made in Sabaruch, because the Kav, this trickle of light, is invested in the kelim of Atzilus. And this oil is made amoy. This light is connected to the Ein Sof. And higher till the moya, which is the illuminator itself, is the core of Hashem. That's where this Kav is connected to. And that's why it has the ability to create ex nihilo, something from nothing, in a way that it comes, it's manifest as a physical creation. And here the Alter Rebbe enters into a beautiful explanation. In the end of the day, the Alter Rebbe is saying that there's something, because it has this connection to the Anhai, which in this case would be the Kav, and the Kav connected to the Ein Sof. As we said, it's connected to the, and higher, connected to the source of the Ein Sof. The source of the Oyer Ein Sof, that is, there's the infinite light, but then there's the illuminator itself. Not only the light, the infinite light of Hashem, the core of Hashem, the etzem of Hashem. And that's where the Kav is sourced. And that's why it has the ability to create. Now, Alter Rebbe is going to add, in creation there's different levels. There's spiritual created beings, Olam Abriya, which would be, as an example, the Olam of Gan Eden. It's a lot happening, but it's all on a spiritual plane. Yagmay Tzira is also on a spiritual plane. Even Olam Asiyah Ruchnis is spiritual creations, and Neshamas and Malachim and so on. Or different chambers, but all on a spiritual. Then comes Olam Asiyah, which the physical was created. Then one's going to say, well, spiritual sounds much more complicated to create. Much greater accomplishment, because it's spiritual, and the physical is just physical. It doesn't have any, it doesn't identify with anything refined or superior. That's why it's physical. It's inferior by definition. There'll be less accomplishment. Comes the Alter Rebbe and says, and this is the next part, which we'll should look forward continuing this coming week, Abaleinu L'Teva, Be'ezus Hashem, that there is something which is even a greater accomplishment for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to create the physical even over the spiritual. It's not provoking, right? But we'll look forward to continuing this coming week. However, to sum it up over here, the reason why the Kelim Atzilus could be a creating force, part of the creating force, not creation, but creating force, is because it's connected to the Kav, which the Kav is connected to the Ein Sof, which is connected to the Moyer, to the Etzem, to the not only the light of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but the essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore has the ability to be able to be a creating force and create the entire Seder Shtalshus lower than Atzilus, which means Bri, Yitzir, Asiyah, and so on, and the multitude of created beings and forces. And again, if it's Bri, Yitzir, and again even Masiyah, just the multitude of created and different divisions and different species and types of species and the myriads in every single level, which we can't even wrap our minds in this physical world. We can imagine how it's in the spiritual worlds as well, or even beyond. Because you're talking about an infinite kayach. The kelim of Atzilus are connected to the kav, and the kav is connected to the Ein Sof, and the Ein Sof is connected to the Moyer, to the Illuminator, ultimately to the Etzem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Therefore, it has the ability to be part of the creating force. The kelim of Atzilus. As long as they're the kelim of Atzilus. So we learned last week, Yotzo Nifradu Me'akelim. So they're very close to God, to the godly reality, but they don't have the ability to create because they were Nifrad Me'akelim, separated already from the kelim, as opposed to the kelim, the Atzilus, as he says, the kav, that light of coming from the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That light and infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is me'ain, similar to the mother, to the luminescent, to the illuminated, which is Musiv Atzmusei Shel HaMatzah Baruch Hu, of the emanator, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore has the ability to create. As long as it's part of the kelim, it's not nifred me'akelim of Atzilus. The kelim, the Atzilus, have that kayach to create, because they're connected to the kav, which is connected to the Ein Sof, which is connected to the Ein Sof, connected to the Illuminator, connected to the Etzem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And again, this coming week, B'ez Hashem, you'll see that Alter Rebbe points out, because of that connection, the physical could have come to being, which in Alter Rebbe's prism, with Alter Rebbe's lens, he'll point out that at the end of the day, it's a greater accomplishment in the context of creation, the physical even over the spiritual, as we look forward to seeing, B'ez Hashem, is Baruch. Have a good show.